The president's ideas for a future in space. Ray Suarez has the story.
President Bush went to NASA headquarters today to outline his plans for astronauts to go to the moon and beyond.
We will build new ships to carry man forward into the universe, to gain a new foothold on the moon, and to prepare for new journeys to the worlds beyond our own.
The president laid out several goals, including finishing the assembly of the International Space Station by 2010 with the help of the current space shuttle program. NASA would also retire the aging shuttle fleet in favor of a new spaceship called the Crew Exploratory Vehicle.
Beginning no later than 2008, we will send a series of robotic missions to the lunar surface to research and prepare for future human exploration. Using the Crew Exploration Vehicle, we will undertake extended human missions to the moon as early as 2015, with the goal of living and working there for increasingly extended periods of time. Returning to the moon is an important step for our space program. Establishing an extended human presence on the moon could vastly reduce the cost of further space exploration, making possible ever more ambitious missions. Lifting heavy spacecraft and fuel out of the Earth's gravity is expensive. Spacecraft assembled and provisioned on the moon could escape its far lower gravity using far less energy and thus far less cost. With the experience and knowledge gained on the moon, we will then be ready to take the next steps of space exploration, human missions to Mars and to worlds beyond.
The first president to propose a manned lunar mission was John F. Kennedy in 1961.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
8 years later, 2 Americans walked on the moon's surface. But in the 35 years since, NASA's space exploration has consisted of mostly unmanned missions. The Mars rover, which successfully landed on January 3rd, is the latest. The agency's space shuttle program sent astronauts into space, often to the International Space Station. But the shuttle program was grounded last year after the crash of the Columbia. That accident and the Challenger explosion in 1986 killed 14 astronauts and hurt morale at the space agency. And many of NASA's programs have been plagued by cost overruns, especially NASA's participation in the International Space Station. Today, President Bush said he would ask Congress to increase NASA's budget by $1 billion over the next 5 years.
Now, a debate about this space initiative. It comes from Lori Garver, former Associate Administrator for Policy and Plans at NASA. She's currently Vice President of DFI International, an aerospace consulting firm in Washington. And Robert Park, a physics professor at the University of Maryland. He's a director at the Washington office of the American Physical Society, the Professional Society of American Physicists. And Professor Park, you heard what the president had to lay out this afternoon. Yes. What do you make of his plan?
Well, I'm a little puzzled. We're on Mars now. We've got a geologist up there, a geologist who never complains about the cold nights, never breaks for lunch. We're on Mars right now, and it's looking great.
So your quibble is with the idea of sending human beings onto Mars?
Yes, exactly. It's a rather old-fashioned sort of idea. I mean, we judge the success of society by the extent to which work that is menial or dangerous is done by machines. And it doesn't matter if it's on Mars, that's still the way a society should work. And we can do it with machines, but in fact, it's not really a robot that's on Mars. It's just an extension of a scientist back on Earth. And he directs the robot, he sees through the robot's eyes. It can do anything a human being can do. In fact, if a human being was on Mars, he'd be trapped in his spacesuit with no sense of touch or feel. There's nothing much to hear. He would have only the sense of his eyes. And that little rover that we've got on Mars has better eyes than any human.
Lori Garver, what was your response to the President's call to action this afternoon?
I'm very enthused about the initiative. This is what we should be doing with our space program. The reason Mars is exciting when Spirit lands on it is because we believe we're going further. The space program is about so much more than science. I absolutely agree. We've done great space science through the robotic program. But it is because we're going as a species that I think the public really can relate to this, and ultimately what has caused us the tremendous benefits.
Well, Professor Park points out that America is already on Mars. What are the hurdles that have to fall to get human beings there instead of machines?
Well, I believe we have fewer hurdles to getting to Mars today than we certainly had to get to the moon back in 1961 when President Kennedy called on us to do that. At that point, we had 15 minutes experience in space. We hadn't been in orbit, only Alan Shepard's flight, and we were able to take humans to Mars, to the moon at that time. We will be able to take humans to Mars at this point with fewer technological challenges and with less money because of the technological advances. The challenges are somewhat political, and whether or not we have the will as a nation to do this, or hopefully as an international community.
Aren't they also physiological? Isn't there a lot we don't know yet about human beings going on a 3-year journey to another planet?
One of the great things about this program, as I understand it now, and as an initiative, it's new and we're learning the details. The devil, as they say, is in the details. But going back to the moon first is going to allow us to try a lot of this. It's also a natural progression out of the space program we've had for 30 years. We said the space station and the space shuttle were to support future exploration. We have experience, as do the Russians, with people in space for more than a year at a time. That is really helping us, and that data will continue until we send people back to the moon and to Mars.
Well, Professor, the President did commit the United States to completing its obligation to the space station, to sunsetting the shuttle program. Yes. Isn't this, as Lori Garver suggests, the logical next step?
No, I think there are a lot of other logical next steps. But I'm glad that we're doing those things, and it will free up some money. Money, for example, to build a new space telescope. If we talk about inspiration, nothing has inspired people like the images on the Hubble telescope. But we now have learned much more. We know how to build telescopes vastly better than the Hubble Space Telescope, which is wonderful. But it's a very old telescope now, and we need to be building another one. And that's what we need to get started on.
Well, NASA is building another telescope, the Webb Space Telescope, and in addition, one of the great things about the moon would be a lunar telescope. Well, on the far side of the moon. It is an ideal place.
They're not building it, but they're going to build it.
They're figuring out how to
begun.
build
Yes,
it, right?
There's a budget allocation and a contractor, and absolutely plans to do that. I agree, that's been an exciting aspect of this. But again, it's that inspiration that calls us to space, and by that, it's not just going to be robots.
That call is romance, and it's certainly a romantic thing to do.
Well, today, Sean O'Keefe was very enthusiastic when he talked about the President putting NASA on the path of exploration and discovery. He said that's what this agency is all about.
Oh, I agree completely. I agree completely, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. But we're doing it at a much lower cost, with no risk to human beings, and it does a better job. When we put that little Sojourner, which was a very primitive robot, on Mars a few years ago, the Sojourner robot had a nose that could sniff the rocks to see what they were made of. It's just an extension of scientists back on Earth.
But if you were to ask people today, especially students, about explorers, they're not going to name robots. They're naming Lewis and Clark. And we need those new Lewis and Clarks. I want my kids to have somebody who is more interesting to them. The first woman who goes to the moon. We've never sent any women to the moon. It's got to be more interesting than whether or not Britney Spears got married this weekend.
So when you do that cost-benefit analysis in your own head, it's adding the component of a fragile human being to that space flight that adds the magic to it?
To me, it's definitely more than magic. I believe as humanity, as a species, we are going into space. We have explored this planet. We will continue to explore this planet. And for our very survival, we must also leave this planet. Ultimately, a lunar base, as the President announced today, is going to help us build new things like a solar power satellite using lunar materials. That will potentially end our dependence on fossil fuels on this planet. When we went to the moon the first time, we turned around and saw the Earth. One of the best things that came out of our lunar program was Earth Day, not to mention the microchip. These are things that would not have happened without humans involved, and we're just going to be going. I feel a sense of excitement today, and I believe that we have some political challenges, but this is the start of something very important, not only for this country, but for humanity.
The political challenges, Professor, I guess, come in the form of funding, right?
It will certainly come in the form of funding, yes. Of course, you know, this president's father stood on the steps of the Air and Space Museum in 1989 and made the same call. He said, we're going back to the moon, we're going on to Mars. He said, like Columbus, we dream of shores we have not seen. Well, if Columbus could have sent a drone, he would have. And as a matter of fact, that program stopped as soon as they got the cost estimate.
But there's a lot of differences
nowhere
today with that
Well,
program.
the prices are no cheaper.
The price is absolutely much cheaper. You have a NASA today that is willing to invest not only some of the current infrastructure that we've talked about that would be scaled back, like the shuttle and the space station investments. At that time, you had a Democratic Congress with a Republican president who immediately zeroed the program. And it looks like this program has a lot more detail. This focus on going to the moon with some real-time dates without setting a Mars date allows me to believe they're going to do this the right way. This crew exploration vehicle, very exciting development of a vehicle that can have a lot of benefits to our national security, to our economic security, and I think this plan is much different than the one we saw 15 years ago from
Does this have to be costed out to a Mars landing to a date, 2020, 2030, before it can proceed, or can it proceed incrementally?
It's proceeding. I don't think they are going to be waiting for any Mars date or a long-term budget. That was a mistake 15 years ago. Technology advances, costs drop. It all depends on how much risk we're willing to accept. Getting the price from the Earth to low Earth orbit down is really key, and I see that as a very critical part of this plan.
And Professor, quickly, do you think the money's going to be found for this?
I don't think so, no. I don't believe it will be. And yeah, but again, the great adventure of our time is to explore those places where no human can set foot. Mars is just one other place in the solar system. The rest of the solar system is pretty much closed to us. The gravity is too great for a human being. It would crush us. The temperatures are too high. The radiation levels are much too high. The most of the solar system is closed to us. We need to do that with robots.
Professor, Ms. Garver, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.